Chapter 23 Captured. Speaking of schedules and countdowns, Mr. Ages spoke suddenly. We got one for this evening. It's getting late. The clock on Nicodemus' desk said 5 o'clock. Mrs. Ferguson's feet dragging at 6 p.m. He spoke gently, but his voice had a chilling sound to Mrs. Frisby's. They all looked at her. "I'm ready," she said quietly, "but there are still a few minutes, and one question you have not yet answered. Why did Jonathan never tell me anything about Nim, or any of the rest?" Mr. Ages said, "I'll try to explain." When Nicodemus and the other moved into the cave near the rose bush, they invited Jonathan and me to stay with them. After all, we have been with them for many months by that time, and at first we did, but after a few weeks we decided to move out. You realized different. We both felt strange associates, always and only with rats, even though they were our close and good friends. As for me, I wanted more solutions and less society. Jonathan, on the other hand, was younger than I and felt lonely, so we moved at first together to the basement of the old farmhouse where I still live. Then Jonathan met you at the stream near the woods somewhere. I think he said, "Yes," Mrs. Frisby said, "I remember." From then on he worried. He didn't want to be secretive, but he didn't know how to tell you one thing. I'm sure Nicodemus has explained to you that the injections we got at NIMH had two effects. One of the was that none of us seemed to be growing any older at all. The children, yes, but not the adults apparently. The injection had given us all a much longer lifespan than even Dr. Soldier had intimate. You can see why this would have been a dreadful thing for Jonathan to have to tell you. You never had the injection. That means that while you stay young, you grow older and older and finally die. He loved you and he always hardly stand that up. Yet if it was stressful to him, he thought how much more painful it would be to you. That is what he could not bring himself to tell you. He would have told you eventually. I know he intended to. Indeed, you would have found it out yourself. You would have seen it happening, but it was hard. He kept putting it off, and then finally it was too late. "Poor Jonathan," said Mrs. Frisby. "He should have told me. I wouldn't have minded, but well, my children also have longer lives," said Nicodemus. "We don't know yet. We think so, but our own children are not yet old enough to be certain. We do know they have inheritable the abilities to learn. They mastered reading almost without effort." He stood up, took out his reading glasses, and looked at the clock. But Mrs. Vivian interrupted again. "One more thing," she said. What happened to Jenner, Nicodemus? He was against the plan from the start in our discussion. He tried to persuade others to oppose it to only if you join him. Today there are some others who are still doubtful about it. They're going to stay with us and try it. Their arguments stayed reasonable, friendly, but the last straw for Jenner was when we decided to destroy the machines. Destroy them for two reasons. One, so if anyone ever finds out the cave, there won't be any evidence of what we've been doing. Nothing but broken bits of metal. Spares that will look like an ordinary junk. We'll put out our electric cables, our lights, and our water pipes. We'll close up all the tunnels leading, and the other reason is more important. When we moved to Tor Valley, we're going to have some hard times. We know that, and we braced for it. If this cave is still open, when the machines and lights, the carpets and running water still here, there will be a terrible temptation to give up and move back to the short life. We want to remove the temptation, but when Jenner heard the discussion, it was made at a meeting. He grew really angry. He denounced us all as idiots and dreamers. He stamped out of the meeting, and a few days later, he left the group forever, taking 6 of his followers with him. We don't know where they went, but we think they will try to find some place where they can set up a new life like this one. I wish them luck, but they have trouble. There won't be any toy tinkers this time. They'll have to steal the machines. Everything that worries us some, because if they get caught, who knows what might happen, but there's nothing we can do about it. We're going ahead with the plan, and once we get to Torn Valley, I think we can stop worrying. Justin stood up. It's time to go. He picked up the paper with the sleeping throat in it. Mrs. Frisby, Justin, and Mr. Aegis walked together up the lawn corridors to the rose bush. Remember when you come up there? The hole in the kitchen floor. Mr. Aegis said you'll be under a few cabinets. It's low, but there's room to move. Go a few steps forward, and you'll be able to see out into the room. Mrs. Frisby will be there getting dinner for her family. They eat at about 6. When she got there, dinner's ready. She'll feed Dragon. He won't be in the kitchen, but he'll be waiting out just outside the kitchen door on the porch. She doesn't let him in the while she's cooking, because she makes such a mess of himself, rooting against her ankles and getting between her feet. If you look to your right, you'll see his bowl is blue and has the word kitten written over and over again. The side she'll pick up full with cat food and put it down again in the same place. Then watch closely. She'll walk over to the door to let him in, and that your chance her back will be towards you. She's got to walk about 20 feet. It's a big kitchen. The bowl will be about 2 feet away from you. You'll be sure the paper packet is open when then just out dump the powder into the food and dash back. You don't want to be inside when dragon comes in. I can't tell you that from experience is how you got hurt. I got hurt there or a few seconds late. I decided there was still time. I was wrong. At the orchard in the woods was Mr. Aegis led them with a cast. He would not be able to climb through the holes to the kitchen. Was no point in the going further. Mr. Aegis and Mrs. Frisby and Justin moved out of the rose bush and looked around them. It was still light there, though the sun was low on the horizon. Straight ahead of them, perhaps 200 feet away, stood the big white farmhouse. Dragon was already on the porch, sitting just outside the door, looking at it expectantly. To their right was the tractor shed, and behind that was the barnyard fence, and the barn itself casting a long shadow. Behind them rose the wood and the mountains. To the left, Mrs. Frisby could see the big stone in the middle of the garden, near which her children waited. As soon as her task was done, she thought she must hurry to them and get ready for the move. We got under the right side of the house. Justin said quietly, "Follow me." They made their way around the edge of the yard, staying in the shadows, keeping an eye out on Dragon. Justin still wore his satchel and had put the powder packet in it. There was a basement under the main part of the Ferguson's house, but the big kitchen had been added later and stood up on a foundation of concert blocks, with only a crawl space beneath. As they approached the gray foundation, Mrs. Frisby saw that near the middle of it, a few inches off the ground, there was a square patch of darker gray. It was a hole left of furniture, and there was a screen over it. When they each Justin caught hold of the screen, and pulled the corner. It swung open. "We lose it a bit," he explained, holding it open. Or her Mrs. Frisby crept through. Carefully, he said, "It's dark there or drops off about a foot. Just jump." We put some straws out the bottom so it's soft. Holding her breath, Mrs. Frisby jumped blindly into the blackness and felt the cushion of straws under her feet. In a moment, Justin landed beside her. They were under the Ferguson's kitchen. "Now," he said softly, look to your left. See the patch of light? That's the the light comes from the kitchen. We pulled dirt under it, so it's easy to reach. Come on, Mrs. Frisby followed him as they got near the bright hole. She could see around her a little. They were walking across bare earth, dry and cool, to the touch overhead. There were heavy wooden beams holding up the floor, and above those the floorboards themselves. Under the holes rose a small round hill of dirt. They walked up this, and then Justin whispered, "This is as far as I can go. There is not room for me to get through it. I'll wait here, come back down as soon as you're finished. Here's the powder." He handed her the paper packet. "Remember to tear it open before you go out to Dragon's Ball. Hurry now, I can't hear Miss Wilson's moving around. She's getting the dinner. Be careful and good luck." Mrs. Frisby first pushed the packet up through the hole. Then, as quietly as she could, grasp both sides, she pulled herself up and into the kitchen. It was light there, but Mr. Aegis had not been joking. When he saw the ceiling was low, there was less than an inch between the floor and the bottom of the cabinet, so that she could not walk properly, but had to flatten herself out and crawl. She did a few steps and discovered that she was trembling. "Stay calm," and she told herself. "Don't panic or you'll do something foolish and spoil everything." Thus, Adumius, she crept forward again until she was near the edge of the cabinet. She stopped. From there, she couldn't see out into the kitchen fairly well. Straight across from her stood a big white gas stove, and in the front of it, putting the lid on a pot, was Mr. Forgiven's. Because the edge of the cabinet was so low, Mrs. Frisby could not see her head, but only up to her shoulders. "There was," Mrs. Frisby said, as if to herself. "The stew is done, the bread in the oven, the table is set. Where was the cat bowl?" Mrs. Frisby looked to her right. As Mr. Aegis had said, there it was, blue with words inscribed around the side. Yet something was wrong. It was not 2 feet from the cabinet, but more than those 4 round wooden legs. She realized that she was looking at the bottom of a kitchen stool. No matter, she thought, the extra distance is just a couple of feet. Mr. Aegis had not mentioned a stool, but perhaps they moved it around. She crawled to her right as close to the bowl as she could get without showing herself, and tore open the package. Just as she did this, Mrs. Ferguson walked over from the stove. Her hand appeared, picked up the bowl, and Mrs. Frisby heard it thump on the counter. over her head. He couldn't sound a can opener. The scrap of a spoon and the bowl was back on the floor. The strong, fishy smell of cat food. Mrs. Fitzgibbons walked away. Now Mrs. Frisby moved swiftly out into the room across the open floor, holding the powder, her eyes intent only on the bowl. She was no longer trembling. She poured in the powder, which instantly dissolved, and the Moses cat food. Still clutching the paper, she turned and stepped toward the cabinet with a bang. The lights went dim. The ceiling, which had somehow become carved, was filled with little round moons. Mrs. Frisby kept running, and her face struck a cold, hard wall of metal, and a voice shouted, "Mother, don't let Dragon in yet. I've caught a mouse." Billy, the younger Fitzgibbons' son, he had been sitting on the kitchen stool, his feet up on the rug, eating berries from a calendar. The calendar, upside down, was now over Miss Frisby.